Hi, I'm Charles Kurzman, a professor of sociology here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm walking through the pit, a central area of campus. In 2006, a young man drove through here in a rented SUV, trying to kill as many people as he could in the name of jihad.
I was standing, walking from class in between Davis and Lenore, and the car came around. He hit a guy right here. He ran over his leg.
He'd been a student here, so he knew this area was going to be packed at lunchtime. And by the time he drove around the corner through here and then off campus past my office, he'd hit 9 people. Most of those folks went off his fender. One person rolled over his windshield, and one person actually went under the wheels. But fortunately, nobody was killed because he picked an area that doesn't have much room for acceleration. We Tar Heels were lucky that day. We were also lucky that he didn't go through with an earlier plan, which was to buy a handgun and shoot up this dining hall at lunchtime. He'd started, but it turns out he'd gotten discouraged by the paperwork for the permit. He may be the only terrorist ever deterred by gun control laws. If terrorism is as easy as driving onto the sidewalk and calling it jihad, we're fortunate that that doesn't happen more often. In the United States, there have been almost 170 Muslim American terrorism suspects and perpetrators since 9/11. That's nothing to sneeze at. But out of a total population of several million Muslims in the United States, the number isn't very large. It looks even smaller when we look at the death toll. Islamic terrorists have killed 33 people in the United States since 9/11. Over that same period, 150,000 people have been murdered in this country. Now, the toll from terrorism would have been much larger if somebody like Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, had used better grade materials. But even if he'd killed several hundred people, terrorism would not be a leading cause of death in the United States. On a global scale, too, Islamic terrorism is not a leading cause of death. According to the World Health Organization, about 2,000 people die every day from violence all over the world. Of these, less than 5% are from terrorism. And most of the toll from terrorism is from 3 civil war zones: Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. Outside of these 3 countries, terrorism averages about 20 casualties a day. I think we all agree we'd rather that this was 0 casualties a day. But in the big picture, jihad has not been a leading threat to human security. So what exactly is jihad? Jihad is the Arabic word for struggle. In the Quran, the sacred text of Islam, jihad is defined as a religious duty, and struggle for God as struggle is his due, the Quran says. Muslims view jihad as a positive thing, and they only use the term to describe struggles that they sympathize with, whether these are armed struggles or struggles against poverty and disease or personal struggles to improve oneself. Throughout Islamic history, Muslim rulers have used the term jihad to describe their military campaigns against Christians, against Hindus, even against other Muslims. Keep in mind that this is not the only meaning of the term jihad for Muslims. Muslims also use the word for peaceful struggles as well. Still, since the 1960s, Islamic revolutionaries have taken up this older military usage of the word to describe their own cause. One of the most influential thinkers to make this connection was Sayyid Qutb in Egypt. Qutb argued that Muslims needed to rise up in armed revolt, which he called jihad, in order to defend Islam. Otherwise, he said, they didn't even deserve to be called Muslims. The Egyptian government arrested and executed Sayyid Qutb in the 1960s, but his writings have gained a following with younger generations of militants, including the revolutionaries who assassinated Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in 1981, and the radicals who fought against the Soviets in Afghanistan, and the founders of Al-Qaeda. Terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda say that the religious principle of jihad allows them or even requires Muslims to commit acts of violence like 9/11. Most Muslims find this offensive. The Muslim Brotherhood, Sayyid Qutb's old organization, repudiated his revolutionary ideology decades ago, and it continues to speak out against terrorism. In the days after 9/11, the Muslim Brotherhood and dozens of other Islamic leaders issued a joint statement saying that they were horrified by the attacks and expressing their deepest sympathies and sorrow, condemning these attacks as contrary to Islamic norms. They cited a verse from the Quran, "No bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another." Most Muslims were appalled by the violence of September 11. In surveys in late 2001, 6 out of 7 Muslims said the attacks were unjustified. At the same time, bin Laden's anti-imperialist rhetoric was quite popular among Muslims, like the way that Che Guevara was popular as a symbol of rebelliousness, even among young people who didn't subscribe to his campaign of revolutionary socialist violence. In any case, in the years after 9/11, as terrorists affiliated with al-Qaeda began to target Muslims rather than Westerners, the symbolic appeal of al-Qaeda drops off. In Jordan, for example, terrorists bombed a wedding reception at a hotel and killed 60 people, and bin Laden's popularity dropped by half overnight. Islamic terrorists claim that they're engaging in jihad, but most Muslims disagree. That cannot be jihad, they say, because it is wrong, and Muslims reserve the term jihad for struggles that they support. Most Muslims are as opposed to revolutionary violence as non-Muslims are. They have nothing to do with armed jihad, and they object to being associated with it just because a few Muslims engage in violent activities. When we tell the story of jihad, it's important to remember that it doesn't just mean terrorism. And when we tell the story of terrorism, it's important to remember that this is a tiny fringe movement in Muslim communities. In fact, the terrorists themselves are constantly complaining about this. What's wrong with you Muslims, they complain on their websites. Why aren't you joining our jihad? With more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, the question isn't, why are there so many Muslim terrorists? The question is, why are there so few?